Struggling to communicate with your co-parent? That's why Peaceful Co-Parenting Messenger was created. It's a communication tool for all co-parents, but especially those who are in high conflict situations. I always tell co-parents who ask, sign up for Peaceful Co-Parenting Messenger as early as possible in your separation and divorce process, because you never know when you're going to need a more robust communication tool that allows you to set boundaries on the communication you have with your co-parent. Are you getting messages that look like War and Peace? It's not a text message. It's the length of a novel. Set the brief chat limitation in the app and keep those messages short and to the point. It's about the kids, right? Keep the focus there. You can also limit the number of messages you receive in a day and other nice a la carte features meant to bring sanity to your life. You deserve that, and your kids do too. Peaceful Co-Parenting Messenger in the Apple App Store and soon in the Google Play Store. Go to peacefulparentapp.com for more information.
This week on Peaceful Co-Parenting Podcast.
Just not wanting to face your finances. That is feeling embarrassed about your situation or about your finances, feeling ashamed of past financial mistakes that you made, not wanting to expose yourself financially to a stranger. This is like a really uncomfortable discussion for some people to have, and some people really just don't want to address it. They just like, I don't even want to look at it. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to deal with it. And that is super common, especially when someone is just coming out of a relationship.
Welcome to Peaceful Co-Parenting Podcast, where we discuss strategies and tips to improve your co-parenting situation, especially if it's high conflict. I'm Bianca Ballo, co-parent, mother, and entrepreneur, creator of Peaceful Co-Parenting Messenger app, and believer in turning challenging situations into something positive. This week, we're talking about how to rebuild financial confidence and independence after divorce. Once we're co-parenting and the dust has settled, it's easy to get lost in managing the day-to-day chaos of kids, work, and home. Sometimes financial housekeeping lands on the back burner for years. Well, today we're talking about steps you can take to bring it to the forefront in order to take charge of your financial future for both you and your children. Let me introduce our guest, Rachael Burns. She's a certified financial planner and certified divorce financial analyst with 3.5-year-old twin boys at home. She spent over a decade working in traditional wealth management firms before a series of life events changed her career path to lead her to start her own financial planning business, where she specializes in helping women in transition. Rachael, it's great to have you with me today. How are you?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm great too. Can you tell us a little bit more about you so we can get to know you better?
When I'm not financial planning, most of my time is spent with the twins. So as you mentioned, I have 3.5-year-old twins. Most of my identity is basically work and kids. So I kind of forget who I am outside of that. But back before all that, I used to enjoy wine tasting, and I was a cat lady before I became a baby lady. And I loved spreadsheets, and is a good thing that I got into the career I did. So that's kind of who I am after hours.
I can relate to that, work and kids. And then who am I? Like, when do I get my me time? So
yes, exactly.
Well, I hope you go out and get a lot of wine tastings because you're in California. So that's where it's at.
I'm in the perfect place.
Nice. So let's dive in and talk a little bit about why you became a certified financial planner.
Ever since I was a little kid, I always really liked math. So it seemed logical that I would go into finance when I got into college. And I had this idea of what that looked like. And I was thinking like stockbroker and, doing stock analysis and economic forecasting. And I was thinking of the very typical idea of a financial advisor. And then when I actually got into that role, once I got out of college, the role was very different than I expected. And what I was surprised by and appreciated was that it was very much a relationship-based business. It was not so much yelling buy, sell on the phone all day. It was like, getting to know clients, getting to know their goals and helping them achieve their goals, which was a really satisfying type of role. And so I did that right out of college. So it was a fairly linear path for me. But I decided to specialize eventually in working with women. And I always kind of unofficially specialized in that. I just gravitated towards women clients, and especially women who had gone through some sort of a difficult transition, either a divorce or the death of a spouse. And so those were always my favorite types of clients to work with. But when you work for the big investment firms, they don't let you just say, I'm only going to work with divorced women. They don't allow quite that much creativity. So it was kind of my unofficial niche for years. But when I went independent, I had the opportunity to work with who I wanted to work with. And that's when I just strictly work with my niche now, which has just been fantastic.
So, what do you like about working with the women in transition?
I think in that situation, there's just so much to offer, and not just the financial support, but I think when you are able to see the whole person and acknowledge the other parts of their life and all the emotions that are going on, and acknowledge that it's such a difficult situation that they're in, I think it helps adapt the delivery of the financial help. And I just feel like the work I'm doing is more meaningful when I'm working with those types of people. It's more gratifying. I can see such a difference in the before and after, that it's such a satisfying type of client to work with, because you can just do so much and make such a difference in their lives.
What was it like working for the big, like, wealth management firms?
It was a good experience. There's great training. I mean, you learn so much by having the support of a giant firm. And I always, in the different firms that I was with, I was always on a team with really great advisors. And so it was a really fantastic way to get started and to kind of develop my career. But once I felt ready to go out on my own, working with the big firms don't allow much in the way of flexibility. So they determine kind of who you work with, how you help them, the tools that you have to help them, the way that you find clients. It's very structured.
So, speaking of finding clients, how do you find your clients? How are you connecting with women in transition?
So I would say two ways. One is I work with a lot of other professionals in the area and also out of the area as well. But I'm very well connected with attorneys, estate planning attorneys, divorce attorneys, CPAs, all sorts of other professionals in the area. And they come across people where it's a great fit, and they know it, and they pass my information along. So there's a lot of that. I'm definitely getting more active online. And that seems like a really great way to be seen. And so that people who are in that situation know that I exist and know how to reach me. That's been really great. So I'm on social media, and I revamped my website, and that's been really effective, and so that people can find me.
What are some important things to consider when you're a single parent and you're a mom, transitioning out of divorce and into co-parenting? What are some things that people should be thinking about?
I would say the first thing that you should focus on is just redefining your goals, because likely, the goals that you had when you were in a relationship are going to be quite a bit different than your goals as a single person. You should take the time and really think about what it is you're trying to accomplish. And that's not just your finances, other life goals as well. But when you think about what exactly do I want to do with my money, with my life, when you get really clear on that, it just is so much easier going forward to know what the right thing to do is, because you know if you're on the right track or not. So I would say that redefining your goals and clarifying your goals are one of the most important things you can do right away. And then the other thing is just getting organized so that you know where you stand, because especially after a divorce, a lot of people don't even know, like, I don't even know how much money we have. I don't know what we have in savings. I don't know what investments we have. Like, a lot of times one spouse will be really out of touch with the finances. And so when you are on your own, you have to reassess your situation and get all of your stuff organized so that okay, these are all of my accounts. These are all of my debts. These are the insurance policies I have. Just getting all that information in one place so that you can really clearly see where you stand. And you could say, okay, this is my net worth. And that's a little different than what I was expecting, but that's good to know. And I'm going to do some things going forward to address that. So that's another really important thing to do post-divorce.
Mm-hmm. Well, that makes so much sense that when you have a plan, you can start chipping away in that right direction versus if you don't have a plan, then you're not even sure where you're going.
Right, exactly.
But so often, I think so many of us don't really have a plan. So what would you say is the biggest mistake you see people taking, like financially, after divorce?
I think the biggest mistake I see is just making big decisions right away, decisions that don't necessarily have to be made, and especially financial decisions. So after a divorce, obviously there are a lot of decisions that have to be made and you can't postpone them. But I do see people make changes afterwards, really soon after their divorce, where it's like, maybe you might want to put on the brakes a little bit and take a little bit more time to think. But sometimes people will, come out of a divorce and they're like, you know what, I want to sell my house, I want to get out of town, or I want to buy this car that my spouse never let me buy, or I want to take the kids on this like worldwide vacation or something, some pretty big ticket item that like they're kind of rushing into that decision. I've seen people get into some trouble in that, and that they can't, after the fact, once things settle down a little bit, they have a better grip on their financial situation. They're like, oh, I really shouldn't have done that. So I think making major decisions too soon is a major mistake. And then also just letting emotions guide your decision-making process is a very common mistake. And that's very understandable because obviously divorce is a very emotional time. But when you are letting your emotions steer you instead of rational thought, then you can get yourself into some situations where you don't make the right decision. And examples of that are someone has a proposed divorce settlement in front of them, and they're just like, you know what, I'm so sick of this. I just want this to be over. I'll sign whatever just to get this to be over with. And then they end up, signing off on something that really isn't in their best interest, and they can't go back and change that. That's a common one. And then another really common emotional decision is when it comes to the family home. So sometimes one parent really has an emotional attachment to the house, and that's very understandable, especially, maybe you raise your kids there and you just don't want to uproot the kids anymore, and they do whatever they can to keep the house, even if it's not in their financial best interests, but their emotions take over. And then what ends up happening is they've kind of shortchanged their long term. They might not be able to reach their retirement goals, or they might not be able to have the lifestyle that they expected because they have this burden of this house. And so it's really important to keep your rational brain in the driver's seat when you're making those types of decisions.
Can you tell me how you get started with a new client? Like, is there a checklist that you go through and you have them start thinking about certain things? Or can you guide me down that path a little bit?
Yeah, so I have the same process that I go through, and it works well in any type of situation I've found. So it starts with defining the goals. Like I mentioned earlier, we just get really specific on what they want to accomplish with their finances in the short term, in a few years, and then in the long term. Once we do that, then we get back together and we get all of their information organized. And I show them a super detailed breakdown of their entire financial situation, so they can see all of their assets, all of their debts. They can see the income that they have coming in. They can see the taxes that they're paying. We know exactly where they stand with their current finances. And that allows us to look at, okay, if this is where you are now, and these are your goals, now we know where we are trying to land. And so then that's where we start coming up with the strategies. So the next step is to come up with, specific recommendations on how they can get from where they are now to where they want to be. And so those recommendations are things like, we need to increase your retirement contributions, or we need to change your investments around a little bit, or you need to get life insurance policy on your ex to protect your child support payments, or whatever. That's totally dependent on their situation, but I come up with a specific action plan for the client. And then after that, I help them actually implement those changes. And then we kind of get back together and review and see if there's any anything that needs to be follow up on. And then we kind of make a plan for what they'll do going forward after that. So that's typically the process that I go through.
So you can do that where you get a life insurance policy out on your ex to like insure the child support payments?
Yep.
Yeah, I had no idea.
Yeah. So that's a common thing. And that's a really important thing to protect child support and also alimony payments. So you can't get an insurance policy on someone without their consent, but you can, maybe it's just for a short time. So let's say you're going to get spousal support for 5 years. You can get a term life policy that covers their life for 5 years. It's very, very inexpensive most of the time. And then you're protected and you own the policy. You typically pay the premiums. So you're not worried that someone's not going to pay the bill and it's going to lapse or something like that. So that's a really common strategy that people use.
Is a financial planner just for people who have a lot of money?
That's an excellent question. So it's not. I think everyone on earth should do some sort of planning for their financial future. That's not what actually happens, but it's something that everyone really needs to think about. And how much money you have will definitely determine the different types of help that are available to you, because obviously there are going to be some advisors or some experts that their fees are, out of your price range or whatever, but everyone needs a plan. You can access different types of help depending on what it is that you need. It's definitely not just for people with a bunch of money, because people with a bunch of money need help managing their bunches of money, but they have the same issues that everyone else has, like, what am I trying to accomplish with my money? What am I saving for? What do I want my retirement to look like? Those are all very universal kind of goals.
Okay. So what is the biggest barrier to someone taking charge of their finances? Would you say, do you see a theme when it comes to what's holding people back?
Yes. And that is just not wanting to face your finances. That is feeling embarrassed about your situation or about your finances, feeling ashamed of past financial mistakes that you made, not wanting to expose yourself financially to a stranger. This is like a really uncomfortable discussion for some people to have. And some people really just don't want to address it. They just I don't even want to look at it. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to deal with it. And that is super common, especially when someone is just coming out of a relationship and maybe their spouse has been in charge of the finances for years and years. And so they haven't had to worry about it, but now they feel totally out of touch. Like, I don't know what the difference between a traditional and a Roth is. I don't know what a mutual fund is. Like, they might feel so overwhelmed that they don't know all of these things. It makes you just kind of freeze up, and it makes it easy to set it aside for another day, but that day often never comes. So that's a super common thing, is just kind of the mental block when it comes to addressing your finances.
Right. I can relate to that. I can understand that, because you do feel a bit exposed when you're opening up your bank accounts and everything that you own.
Absolutely. And a lot of people are worried that if they work with an advisor, they're going to be like, well, what were you thinking, buying this thing, or you should have more money. I mean, if an advisor says something like that, then you should find a different advisor, because most of the time you are going to get a very supportive response. It's very understandable to have those feelings, but you should feel comfortable talking to a professional about it, because they will not judge you most of the time. I promise not to judge. I can't speak for everyone.
Right. I guess, you can speak for yourself. You won't judge anyone. So you've worked with people that have limited assets and probably people that have a lot of assets. So all over the board.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely.
And so if you're just making ends meet and there's no extra money to save, that's okay. You can still see a financial planner.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of resources available, or you might not want to pay an hourly rate to go talk to some person, but there's different levels of help available. And they have advisors who specialize in people who are just starting out, who have very reasonable fees. There are a lot of advisors who do pro bono work. So if you feel like, oh, I don't have any money, I can't get help, you might need to look a little harder, but there is help out there. And I really encourage people to go online and look up pro bono financial advice. There are advisors out there who specialize in that type of situation.
And so where do you land on the spectrum then?
So in the past, I've only worked with the higher end because I've only worked with people who had enough to meet the minimums of working with a big firm, which usually they have to have several $100,000 outside of their retirement plan, outside of their house. I'm not talking net worth. They needed to have like an account with a couple $100,000, which that's a very small portion of the population that has that. Now, because I don't charge based on how much money I'm managing for people, I can work with people across the board. I typically work with people who have enough money to where they have questions about what to do with it. I don't work with a ton of people who are like, I'm just starting out and I have no idea where to start, because that's a very different type of service that would entail. And so I typically specialize in people who, maybe they just got out of a divorce, maybe they just lost their spouse, they have some money, they just need help moving forward and having the confidence to manage it going forward. It's not so dependent on the dollar amount. It's more like the fact that they're going through a transition that makes them a good fit.
Where do people get that confidence? This show's about regaining, that financial confidence or maybe just getting it for the first time.
Yeah.
Where does it come from? Because we already said, it can be really uncomfortable to even go there and look at your finances, let alone feel confident about it.
So that confidence is not something you're born with. So if you don't have it right now, don't worry, because it's not too late. It's something that you can develop. It might take some time and it might take some work, but you can become confident by familiarizing yourself with your own situation, familiarizing yourself with basic topics, and coming up with a plan so that you know what you're doing is leading to where you want to be. I think that's where financial confidence comes from, is like knowing where you stand and knowing where you're going. And you need to either you do some research, you can do that on your own, or you can get some help from an expert and you come up with a plan. And you can come up with a plan on your own, or you can have a financial planner help you with that. But I think that's the key to achieving financial confidence.
So would you say a financial planner is the way to go, or are there any other experts that you think are important to include in this conversation?
Yeah, so depending on what type of help you're looking for, there are several different experts that you can bring in onto your kind of financial team, so to speak. And if you're looking for someone to just give you investment advice, then there are advisors who specialize in that. Advisors can specialize in all sorts of different things. So, or if you want someone to help you plan for your future, you can get someone who specializes in financial planning, or there are some advisors that kind of do both of those things. But that's how you can work with advisors. There are also areas that advisors don't go into or shouldn't go into, and that's things like taxes and law. So you want to have different professionals helping you with those things. So if you need help coming up with a plan that minimizes your taxes going forward, you want to make sure that you have a CPA or a tax preparer doing your taxes. You don't want to have your financial advisor giving tax advice. And then if you need advice with the legal aspects of your divorce, you want to have your family law attorney. And then if you need help planning how to leave your assets to your kids if something happens, then you'd want to have an estate planning attorney. So there are several different professionals that you will most likely want to interact with at some point. You don't need to do that all at once, but those are all really important people that you want to have on your financial team. You don't get all of those things in one person. You do need to loop in a couple of different people for that.
You had mentioned that when you worked with the large companies, prior to starting your own business, they worked off of a percentage of the money they managed. How does it work for you now? Like, let's say someone were to hire you as a financial planner. What would that look like as far as costs?
Yeah. So for the majority of my clients, it's a flat fee. So you can see for this fee, this is exactly what I get. There's a certain number of meetings. It's very structured process. It lasts 6 months. And if there are other clients where they do have accounts where they want me to manage, that's a much smaller portion of my practice. And I really only do that for clients where I've done their financial plans. So I know what we're trying to accomplish with their finances. So if they really want me to manage an account for them, I can do that. And in that case, I charge a small percentage of the account balance just for the administration and everything. But for the most part, it's just a flat fee. There are more advisors now that operate on that type of business model just because it's nice, because it doesn't matter how much money you have. You get a service, you know exactly what you're getting, and you know exactly what you're paying for.
And so the accounts that you manage, is that like an investment account?
Mm-hmm.
Got it. So what should parents be thinking about in regards to their own financial independence versus the future of their children, as far as like, say, college funds or, having a will? I mean, can you kind of guide me down that road?
Yeah, so this is an area where I see people make some massive mistakes. And it's hard because the intent behind it is so good, but the long-term consequences can be so bad. So this is a really important topic. Parents will often put their children's needs before their own. That's not shocking to any parent. Any parent is going to probably identify with that. But when you do that in a financial way, and to the extent that your personal financial future is harmed, then you're not doing your kids any favors. And that's a really tough one to explain to a parent, like, no, you shouldn't do this for your children. It's such an emotional thing. And as a parent, I totally get, like, of course you will do anything for your kids, but you have to remember that if you sabotage your own finances, then you could become dependent on them at some point. And that was probably not what you had in mind. And so what I see, and especially with college is such a sensitive thing for parents, like, especially parents where they didn't go to college, or maybe they had to pay their own way. And they're like, you know what, I want to give my kids an education. And I don't want them to have to work part-time, and I don't want them to have to do what I did. And so they'll make it their top priority to pay for their kids to go to college, wherever their kid feels like going, whether that's a private school that's like $100,000 a year, or, I mean, college can be extraordinarily expensive. I've seen so many parents have this attitude, like, whatever it takes, we'll do it. I just want them to be able to go, whatever I need to do, I'll do it. Some people can totally afford to do that, and it's not a problem. And that's totally their decision. If they want to do that, that is absolutely what they should do. But if someone is in a position where they can't actually afford to do that, what ends up happening is they don't have the cash flow to cover their basic expenses. And then they're probably not saving for their own retirement. A lot of times they'll pay for college instead of putting money in for their own retirement. So by the time they get older, there's no money. Like, I have a specific example where I had a client who, she was a single mom, and she was a successful professional. She ran her own practice, and she really, really wanted to pay for her son to go to a very expensive art school. She didn't take student loans, but she had a ton of loans against her business so that she could pay for her son to go to this school in a super expensive neighborhood. She paid his rent and everything. And when it was all done, she was up to her eyeballs in debt. She's now retirement age, but is not going to be able to retire anytime soon. And her son has an art school degree and is still making minimum wage, is still living in a super expensive neighborhood where she's still supporting him. What was the point of that? You didn't help your son get into a better financial situation. Yeah, he has a degree, but what is that actually worth? So that's a tough one. That's something I see so often. You have to consider, before you offer help to your kids financially, you really need to figure out if that's something you can afford to help with, because it's not just about being selfish. It's about ensuring that you will be in a good position going forward so that you don't need help yourself someday.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe setting up an account or an investment that's a little more flexible, maybe that it could be used for college or for your own retirement or something like that. But like thinking about it strategically.
Yeah. And just understanding the financial commitment that you're making and understanding the return on that. So what is this kid going to get from this private school education? Are they going to have a better job afterwards? Are they going to be a more successful person? Like, you need to think about the costs and the benefits before you make a huge investment like that.
And so what resources do you know of that could help women with this huge task of financial savvy?
Obviously, there's a ton of stuff online, but that's overwhelming to just start with Google. It's like, where on earth do you start and how good is that information? So I'm not going to be like, well, just Google it. But I think the best way these days is podcasts. I think that is the best way to get very approachable information on any subject, but especially with financial stuff. There are so many great financial podcasts. There are a lot of podcasts that are specific to divorce that are excellent. And everyone has time to listen to podcasts. I don't care if you're the busiest person on earth. If you ever are in the car, if you're ever folding laundry, if you're ever like studying or whatever you're doing, you can listen to a podcast and you can pick up so much valuable information in bits and pieces. It's not a time commitment on your part. I mean, it's like you can do it while you're doing something else. But I think that's the best way to slowly kind of grow your financial knowledge, is just find some podcasts where the speaker resonates with you and they're interesting and they make you interested in the topic. There's so many great options to choose from.
Do you have one in mind that you really like?
There's one that I found not too long ago that I love. It's called How Not to Suck at Divorce. And it's so good. It's such good information, but it makes me laugh so hard that I like have to listen to it alone in my car because it makes me laugh so hard. But it just has some really practical information on divorce. And I just think it's fantastic.
Great. And so how can people get a hold of you, Rachael?
So if you go to my website is trueworthfp.com. All over the place, there are buttons where you can schedule a complimentary strategy session with me. And I really encourage people to take advantage of that. I'm happy to chat with them. And, even if it's not a good fit, I'm super happy to throw out some tips or some quick action items for people. And then they can follow me on social media. I'm on Instagram at trueworthfp. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. But I would say check out my website and book a call.
Okay. And so you are taking clients virtually then?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and your insight and your advice. I hope you'll consider maybe coming back on the show.
Thank you so much, Bianca. It was great.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Peaceful Co-Parenting Podcast. I hope the time was well spent and you got a lot out of the episode. If so, please rate and review the podcast. I would really appreciate it. If you're interested in sending me a feedback message, asking a question, suggesting a podcast topic or guest, or downloading Peaceful Co-Parenting Messenger as a tool for better communication with your co-parent, go to peacefulparentapp.com or see the links in the show notes. Have a great week, and as always, stay peaceful.
This episode of Peaceful Co-Parent was brought to you by the Equal Shared Parenting Program. Do you find that you're ever in need of someone to talk to, like a counselor or a therapist? How about legal advice? If you've looked into it, you know these services can add up financially. That's why the Equal Shared Parenting Program exists, to help parents be their healthiest holistic selves. It's a membership program that offers discounted and free services like behavioral health, free tax prep and advice, and access to financial education and credit counseling, all for the low price of $29.99 a month. Learn more about the Equal Shared Parenting Program by going to equalsharedparentingbenefits.org/PCPM. The PCPM stands for Peaceful Co-Parenting Messenger. That's equalsharedparentingbenefits.org/PCPM.